We all tend to get what we focus on, and because you value relationships so much, you focused on it, and you've made them better and better constantly. I'm curious, what do you think makes the biggest difference in the quality of people's lives? If there was a distinction that you think sets people apart, what would you say it is?
Well, I have a feeling that what really makes a difference in your quality of life is that you have a sense of who you are and where you're going, and you make strides towards that. Spencer Johnson and I, when we wrote The 1 Minute Manager, said that people who feel good about themselves produce good results. And that's really true. When you feel good about yourself, you do things better. But when I wrote Putting the 1 Minute Manager to Work with Bob Lauber, I changed that because I really realized that just trying to make people feel good in a vacuum doesn't really work. One of the differences between us and other animals is that we're purposeful. And that doesn't mean that other animals aren't. We were in a safari for 3 weeks, and their purpose basically is to eat and survive. And so,
Yeah.
But we can actually think of purposes beyond our own well-being. And so in Putting the 1 Minute Manager to Work, we changed the quote and said, people who produce good results feel good about themselves. And my sense is that people who get some sense of what they want to do and then they go do it. And this doesn't mean that it has to be a business goal, it has to be an athletic goal, and all can be a relationships goal, it can be, but that you are purposeful about it, and then you go, wow, I made it, you know.
Right.
And you get a chance to really say, I did that, and I accomplished it, and I said I was going to do it. And so a friend of mine, Rick Tate, first gave me the quote, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I think that the most contented people I know are constantly getting feedback on how well they're doing in relation to what's important to them. And so I think we all have to set our goals and our visions in relation to what we have chosen as our role in life, but just sitting around, you know, complaining or thinking things are going to come your way is not the way to do it. I think it's purposeful.
And sometimes you're not going to get the feedback automatically, obviously. I think a lot of people are winning, but they feel like they're losing because they're not keeping score. You know, they have no measurement tool, as you say. How do you measure your progress in various areas of your life?
Well, what I try to do in the beginning of the year is say, okay, it's a year from now, what might I have accomplished? And I break those into different categories, like relationships, like my own spirituality, like my health, like my writing goals, and then my goals with our company and things like that, and look at, say, okay, what would I feel really good about at the end of the year that I would accomplish in several of these areas. In some years I focus more on one area than another, but I kind of have a sense of family, friends, health, spirituality, writing, business, and that kind of thing, and then say, okay, where am I heading this year, and how well can I do that? And I feel best when I constantly monitor and keep track of that. And when I don't, which I have had lapses where, you know, I've been so caught up in doing that I forgot what the whole thing was about, you know, when your life kind of gets out of whack.
Yeah.
I think we all really teach what we need to learn, you know. So I constantly am on my feet talking to people about getting their life in order and setting their priorities and things like that, because that's something I need to do. And
I can relate.
But I think that one of the things that keeps us up, and I consider you and I up people, is that we're constantly wanting to learn. And I was just amazed at that when I got a chance to work with Norman Vincent Peale, who's 91, and he is so excited about learning new stuff. And so I figure we got years to go if we have that. And I think that's what keeps my mom at 86 going. You know, I come home after I've been on a trip, and she has a folder for me of things that she's read that she thinks I should know about, and that kind of thing. And it's just great.
That's great. I got a chance to hear Norman speak when I was in Toronto recently, and he was a gem. I know he's been a role model for you.
Terrific, yeah.
And he certainly is for me as well. Let me ask you about your newest book, The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. I've read all your books, and I love them all, but I have to say, I think this one may be your best, at least for me. We all judge things by what we need most, so I'm one of those crazy persons you described who's out there trying to do everything at once. and this was absolutely phenomenal. I'm curious, can you give us some background on where the original concept came from, and what motivated you personally to want to write this book in particular?
Well, the concept of the monkey really came from Bill Onken, who's one of the co-authors, and Hal Burrows, who's been a long-time presenter of Bill's material. And I met Bill in 1977, and he had written an article in the 1970s for the Harvard Business Review called Managing Management Time, Who Owns the Monkey?, which is one of the most widely read articles ever written. And when I read that, I mean, it really got to me. And so when I got a chance to meet Bill, it was just one of those great joys. Bill unfortunately died about a year ago at 75 and was one of the great inspirations to me. He went to Princeton. I always kidded him I went to Cornell. And I always said Bill never got over it that he went to Princeton. But he had a physics degree at Princeton and no other degrees. And he spent 25 or 30 years working for different government agencies and different kinds of companies. And he was just an astute observer of what was going on. And so in the 1960s, he started doing seminars on managing management time, which he was saying is that before you can talk as a manager about managing your time, you have to have some time. and so he said all these techniques about, overcoming time wasters and all those are only good if you have any time. And he watched what happened to people as managers, and one of the biggest ones was his whole, which he started, the monkey on the back analogy, which is a monkey really essentially is somebody else's problem. Bill really defined it as the next move. And anytime somebody comes to you and says, Tony, we have a problem, you better watch out, because the monkey is about ready to leap, usually because you know enough about it to know it's a problem, but maybe not enough to solve it right then. And so you say to me, Ken, I know what you're talking about. Let me talk to Becky and I'll get back to you. See, and now I walk out 30 pounds lighter because you've got the next move. And Bill said that monkeys have to either be shot or fed. And if you don't shoot them, you're into care and feeding. And if you're care and feeding one of my problems, then who's working for whom? You're working for me. And like any good supervisor, I'm back in your office, or I call you on the phone and says, Tony, have you talked to Becky yet? Oh, God, I really haven't. But I'll get on it. See, now I have you under pressure to do my job. And what's a problem with that is you are making me dependent on you. And people who take other people's monkeys are very subtle, and they don't even know what they're doing. But what you're really doing is crippling other people. Bill told me, I was a typical Eastern do-gooder,
Right.
And I wanted to, stomp out pain and all that. And
Solve everybody else's problem for them.
Yeah, I was running around, rescuing everybody. And so the monkey on the back concept is just such a beautiful analogy. And when people started hearing Bill talk about it, it became kind of legendary. And so I was motivated to write this book with Bill and Hal, because I think it's such a marvelous concept, and I wanted it to get as wide an audience as possible. And then when Bill passed away, I wanted more than ever to make sure that his work was not lost by any means. I love this book. I think that it hits people more than any, because I think we all tend to run around with a lot of monkeys on our back that aren't ours. And it's not a cold approach, meaning to say, hey, that's your monkey, you keep it. It's not that you're abdicating or you're just buck passing and all. What the book does marvelously is to say, like we were saying in the beginning, is how do I eventually get you to the point where you can care and feed your own monkeys? And so it's, I'm not going to take your monkey away, but I'll help you learn how to care and feed it, because that is where you get empowered. That's where you really get excited. And Bill has 4 rules of monkey management that are just absolutely so terrific that if you would use these in any kind of relationship.
When you're talking about the monkey, you're not really just talking about a problem, but what you're really talking about is the next move in the problem, right?
That's right.
And I think it's important. So if I come along to you, Ken, and I say, Ken, I got this problem, first thing Ken Blanchard wants to do, being the kind of guy he is who cares about people, is help me solve my problem. But if, in fact, you try and do that and it doesn't finish here, then you've left with my monkey. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yes, and if I say, well, I know what you're talking about, Tony, let me call so-and-so. Now, sometimes that's appropriate and all, but if you have a tendency to always get the next moves with you and everybody's sitting waiting for you to make the next move, now you're creating a bunch of dependent people who are calling and checking up whether you've made the move for them, rather than saying, yeah, I know what you understand. Somebody you ought to get in contact with is so-and-so. Let me give you their number and give you an entree to get them. Now you learn something from that and all, and I'm not owning the whole thing.
And you've given me the muscles, because if you do the exercise for me, I'm going to feel pretty weak.
That's right.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what are the 4 rules then?
Well, the 4 rules of monkey management is before you break a meeting with an individual or a group, you have to first of all decide what's the next move, so that if you and I are discussing something and we end that discussion, we want to make sure we don't drop that until we know who's got the next move, what's going to be done on this. The second key thing in the rules is that we need to establish who owns the monkey. It's not always the person next makes the next move that owns it, but ownership is very important because people will take better care of what they own. And so you might say, can I own this one, but you could really help me if you take this next move. But it's really clear that you own it, and I'm only making one move.
So I know I'm responsible.
That you're responsible.
The monkey's going to stay on my back as long as I know I'm the owner.
That's right.
Okay.
And the third rule is that before we part company, we need to decide what insurance policy this monkey is going to have, depending on your nervousness or my nervousness. And the 2 rules of insurance are, one is recommend, then act, and that's for when you're concerned about what I might do.
Right.
And so now I can't burn the building down without you first knowing about it. Now, if I'm not nervous and I think you've grown to the point where you can run with the ball yourself, I can go to act, then advise. But we need to decide what the insurance policy is, because what so often happens with parenting and a manager, you say, I didn't tell you could do that, who told you could do and you're doing self-analysis. After post-game analysis is what you're doing.
Right.
And so you want to make sure what insurance policy there is.
Now, when you say insure it, what do you mean by that, actually? You're saying ensuring the monkey's being handled?
Well, it's really saying is what coverage do I want? Do I want close supervision or do I want general supervision? And if I say, bring me a recommendation before you act, I want an insurance policy that's pretty tight,
right?
Because I don't want anything to happen that's a surprise. Where the other, I'm much looser.
I think a lot of people probably don't give up the monkeys. They're holding everybody else's monkey because they're afraid. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing then with the insurance policy is giving them the opportunity to really give the monkey away, but still be able to direct and manage effectively.
Yeah, and sometimes the next move might be, why don't you think it over and then bring me a recommendation tomorrow?
Right.
See, and now I know that you're not going to run off and do something.
Right.
Because you have that insurance policy, but it keeps the initiative with you. So you want to keep the initiative as much with the other person as possible. The fourth and final rule of monkey management is that we need to schedule a checkup exam. Even with healthy people, they need a medical checkup every once in a while, so that when are we going to check up on this next, so that we both know when that is. Now, the better somebody gets at handling responsibilities, the less frequent the checkup times are. So checkup combined with insurance policy together with ownership and next moves is a really nice strategy, and we're starting to use it in our company at meetings, which to say, okay, that agenda item, we finished with that, okay, who's got the next move, who owns it, what's the latitude or freedom you have to act, and when are we going to check up on that, next week or next month? And the philosophy that Bill had was keeping this initiative always in the other person's court, even though he has some funny stuff. For example, when I'll say to you, well, give me a recommendation. See, and the next day, into my in-basket comes a recommendation, see, which is now, who's got the next move? You got the
monkey now.
See, it's all. And so Bill said, well, the way you deal with that is I call you, Tony, and I said, I got your memo on that Anderson proposal. Why don't you come in and read it to me? See, and you'll
I
say,
could just tell you about it.
yeah, probably in half the time,
Right.
see? But now what I'm doing is I'm forcing that memo rather than you sitting around waiting for me to read and react. Is my reaction is let's have a meeting, and at that meeting I can keep the initiative in your court, where if my in basket is full, and everybody's out there waiting for me to respond, then I got a cage full of monkeys.
Yeah, you're the bottleneck too. Then you're to
That's
blame when things aren't happening. That's interesting. I think most managers deal with that on a regular basis. They've got all these projects going, and they want to feel like they're in control, and they want to feel like they're in charge, and maybe you want to feel like they're irreplaceable. I know in the book you touched on that. I thought it was an interesting perspective. Maybe you could share that.
Well, I think that if you think that you're irreplaceable, that's the kind of person who ought to be replaced, because
Right.
there's nothing worse than losing somebody, who knows everything and nobody else does. And therefore, I think promotion should depend on your having a ready replacement to take your job. That's where you really are valuable.
So basically what you're saying is I think your synopsis of those 4 rules are, number 1, you got to describe what we've got here as a monkey. What is the next move? What needs to be done? 2 is you got to assign it. 3 is you got to ensure it, which is your way of making sure the job's going to get done, the next move's going to happen, and that the initiative hopefully will be followed up on. And then 4thly is to give it a checkup. And I think those 4 are really powerful. Let's take a real-life examples for people. Give me an example outside of business. How could we use these 4, let's say, with our kids or in a relationship? Can you think of a context or an example we might be able to utilize for people?
Well, suppose your kid comes home and says, "Mom, Dad, I made the Little League."
I love this example.
Great, So the kid says, but I need a ride to practice and to games. And typical parent response immediately is, well, gee, I think I could take you on Monday and Wednesday, but I don't know about that. Well, who's on the team? Maybe I can set up a carpool and all. And all of a sudden, the kid is just baiting you and setting you up. And here, what was a celebration is now a huge monkey or almost gorilla, as you got to deal with the whole carpool. And here's this kid that's on the phone all the time anyway. And why not to say, congratulations. And then the kid says, I need a ride. Well, gee, this is a real opportunity. What? To keep initiative in his. It's all right for you to say, I think I could take you Monday afternoon and Wednesday. In fact, I'd enjoy that, but I don't see how I can do it any other time. What do you think would be the best way to get other rides? Well, gee, I don't know. Well, maybe you can't be on the team. Well, I don't know. Maybe we can't. Well, who's on the team? How are you going to do that? And now what you're doing is you're doing what you can do that you feel good about, but now you're starting a process to say, well, how could he set up his own carpool, and how could he do that? I mean, because now the responsibility is going there rather than he racing in to watch TV while suddenly you're on the phone with this great monkey. And what happens is that kids and other people don't realize you do it, but when you make somebody dependent, what you're really doing is you're just sapping out their own self-esteem and their own power, where if you can teach people even a simple thing of getting themselves a ride. We used to say with Scott and Debbie, we'd be happy to take you or pick you up, but we'll never go 2 ways. If you can't talk some other parent into taking you one way, then you stay home.
Good rule.
So almost anything that happens, you can say, aha, here's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for people to take initiative. Now, is it appropriate that I take the initiative, or is it appropriate that I help them take the initiative? And as much as possible, if you can teach people to be responsible for their own conditions, their own place in life, then they're going to really feel powerful. But dependency, I worry about the suicide rate in this country, and I think a lot of it, as you read coming from, quote, good families and all, is that people get rescued tremendously now. You're not holding kids accountable.
Right.
But I think that's making people realize that there are some consequences to your behavior. Not that you bail out on them, but that you help them own them. It's not yours.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, keeping the initiative there is so critical. One time I sat down with my second youngest, Joshua, and he was, I think, 8 at the time. We were discovering what his rules were, because we all seem to have rules, whether we're aware of it or not, for how people should be and what they should do or not do. And one of the rules he had for moms was that moms shouldn't do everything for their sons. And I said, well, why? And he said, because one day mom won't be there, and that son will have to be able to do things for himself. And
That's
if he doesn't
powerful.
do it, he said, if he doesn't learn now, he won't know then. And I think that's really true. I'll never forget him saying that. We have to give people the opportunity to learn now, because one of the things I loved about in the book was the metaphor you might share with of kids today being bored, or what parents do in sports today, because I related to that very powerfully personally. I thought it was pretty interesting when you talked about what it was to organize a sports team back in those days. You might relate that. I really enjoyed that a lot.
Well, I think those are the kind of examples that I really love about the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, because we're trying to give examples that people get them in the gut level. And I was just relating how we pretty well, organized, got the equipment, got the kids, got the things, set up games, all ourselves. We did all the planning, organizing, motivating, and all. Nowadays, the kids, who does it? The parents. All the kids today got to do is get dressed. And they all look like, superstars and that kind of thing. And they get driven to the game. You wouldn't want them to get any exercises. We have these big diamonds with parents sweating, getting hot dogs and hamburgers out because you don't want the kids to go hungry. And people in the stands with major league scoreboards filling them out, and just a lot of craziness. So we've created boredom. I mean, kids don't know what to do if there's not a lesson this afternoon or it's not a required thing. And when I was a kid, if I said to my mom, I'm bored, she'd go, whomp, or, how's that for a little boredom? Or she'd say, all right, go in and do the garage, clean out the garage.
I'll put you to work if you're bored.
And where I think what happens is that if you keep on taking initiative away from people, then when they get away from Big Daddy or Big Mommy who are going to do it all for them, and they get caught doing inappropriate things, they don't have any internal way to deal with that. And I think there's where you get the suicides and the depressions and all that, because suddenly the outside world is going to hold you accountable.
And you have no strategies on how to organize yourself
That's right.
to make things happen.
And so what we need to do is teach people how to fish rather than giving them a fish. And I look at that, even in a foreign policy. We have never made a long-term friend where we've gone in and owned all the problems, shoved all kinds of money, and not taught them any skills.
Right.
In the long run, they just tell us to go and all, where if you went in and said, okay, what we want to do is teach you
how to manage your monkeys.
Yeah.
That's in essence what has to happen.
I mean, here we are with a whole southern neighborhood that aren't big fans of ours. Why? Because we haven't done anything to help them solve their problems, but dump money in and act like we're Big Daddy or Big Mom.
We're about to enter into the same thing in Eastern Europe now, too. Yeah. If we're not careful, we'll be funding, but not necessarily teaching and training.
That's right. The people I remember most, teachers and all, were the people who pushed me to be the best that I can, stretched me, and I ended up saying, wow, I did that, and what's the old Chinese phrase? The greatest leader of them all is when the job is done, the people say we did it ourselves. And I think that's what the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey is about, is don't own a problem if it's not yours, but how do you help people care and feed monkeys so they get empowered, they get strong and all. And I think it frees you up tremendously to do the things that are really important for you to do, rather than taking a briefcase home every night of other people's monkeys and they're all sitting around wondering if you'll ever to get to their folder.
Yeah. What are some of the hooks? I loved your metaphor that you talked about in there of the idea that your notepad is like a giant crane lifting monkeys off other people's backs and putting them on your own. What are some of the hooks that we have out there? What are some of the phrases we should listen for to avoid picking up other people's monkeys? Do you have any clues there?
Well, we is a big one.
Yeah.
When anybody says we, there's a wonderful dialogue in there where the guy comes with his boss, we have a monkey, and the guy says, look, let's clean up the pronouns. He said, first of all, we have never had a problem. Either you have a problem or I have a problem. If it's your problem, I'm willing to help you with it.
Right.
And if it's mine, I might need some help from you. But we will never have a problem. So we is a really big one.
Right.
And I think the whole concept of in basket and out basket. It's a whole chain of monkeys traveling around an organization. And I think if people, rather than sending people memos, would get up out of their seat and walk down the hall and talk to somebody, then they could legitimately decide the next moves and that kind of thing. I think we just get caught in our managing our in basket and our out basket rather than managing people and situations.
How do we manage our own monkeys more effectively? What's the best way to attack the challenges we've got?
Well, I think the first one is to prioritize them, because there are a lot of monkeys around, but some of them you ought to let starve. Not all of them are worth keeping alive.
That's great.
And so we need to separate out our jungle.
Right.
So to say, which ones am I going to focus my time and energy on? Because if you try to be all things to all people and to try to do everything, you are going to burn yourself out. There's two real extremes in life. One is burnout, and burnout comes from lack of completion, lack of feedback and satisfaction on a whole bunch of, you're just racing around like somebody. And the other is rust out, where my wife Marge talks about that all the time, where you just don't have enough to do. And since we are purposeful beings, we really need to set some goals. And so all people ought to look at, okay, where would I like to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? And say, okay, which monkeys are most important to me? Where are they? And don't beat yourself up for monkeys that you're not dealing with that maybe are ones that you shouldn't.
What would you say is the most important thing that the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey will give someone? What's the promise of this book? If you're going to, I know you've given us a lot of promises, but what's the essence for you?
Well, I think it's the best weight loss program probably in history, because you're guaranteed to lose 30 pounds overnight because you get rid of some of these monkeys. So I think it's a chance to feel empowered yourself, because I think we get bogged down and feel guilty and feel like we're not being helpful, and how come these people are waiting for my answers and all this kind of thing. So I think the biggest payoff is it increases your self-esteem as well as the people you're dealing with. It increases the people you're dealing with self-esteem because they start to feel good, because they learn how to care and feed their own monkeys, and they start to feel their own power. It increases yours because you feel good about their growth, and you also now can put some of your discretionary time, which you have lost, into projects and goals and areas that are going to really be empowering and exciting for you.
You mentioned earlier that you went on this trip last fall to 18 countries with your family, and I know that was a long-time goal for you, and it's pretty phenomenal to be able to do that, because you're the major person, you're the head of your own organization, and yet you've managed to do that. Was the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, was that philosophy a foundation for you taking that time out and making that trip happen?
I think it really helped us really see that we could do that, and I think it was also a way that we could take another step to say to our management team, particularly Marge's management team, because she really manages the place more than I do, that we felt good enough to just let them run with the ball. And we said we don't want faxes rolling in our room every day.
In Africa, that's kind of tough, huh?
I think it made them feel good and us feel good.
Yeah.
To the point where we have moved from a two-person organization where everything was dependent on us to an organization where people really see their own destiny tied in and not all sitting around waiting for me.
Right. What did you learn on that trip? Are there any particular distinctions or strategies? I know when I go to a movie or when I listen to a record or I get a chance to have a conversation like this with a friend, I always pull away some gems, and I'm sure you did too. Is there any particular gem, strategy, idea, or distinction you had on this trip that was valuable?
I think sometimes whether things are learnings or relearnings, but the biggest aha that came so clear to me was that the problems in the world today are not technological. They're all human. I mean, we flew into Johannesburg, South Africa, one of the most modern, beautiful cities. We left there and went to Australia, where the pilots have immobilized the country. We flew from there to Ireland and met wonderful people in a beautiful country, and yet they have people fighting and killing each other. And I mean, they're all human problems. Rabbi Kushner did kind of a prayer breakfast, and he said, a lot of people say, why believe in God or some external spirit and all that? And he said that the best way you can describe it is when we put a man on the moon several decades ago, every television set in our country was on that. The second moon landing, if you were home, you watched, and if you weren't, you didn't. The third moon landing, they had to play golf on the moon to get any interest. And he said, we get bored by things made by man. He said, but how many of you get bored by a beautiful sunset or the sound of a sparkling brook or things like that? And I think we've gotten kind of taken into believe that technology is everything. And as I went around, the big aha is, I tell you, we got tremendous technical skills, but we need to shore up our human skills. And Marge and I came back recommitted and excited about the field that we have chosen, which is how do you help people enhance their human relations and their interaction with people, because if we don't do that, we could destroy ourselves in the midst of the most unbelievable technological understandings that we have. And so that was a big aha. And you see what's happened in the Eastern Bloc and all, that those are all human issues, and there's a wonderful spirit in the world now, and I think there's a real place for personal development and organizational development and leadership development. And I feel really blessed to be in this field, both teaching and learning at the same time, because I think we now can make a real difference. But we gotta, feel good about what we've done technologically, but to realize that the big payoff for survival and continual growth of the human species is our ability to listen, to love, to care, and to support each other.
That's wonderful. Ken, what do you think is the key to really enjoying what you do in life?
I think enjoyment is a choice. And I think that we as human beings, if we have choices by what we do, that we ought to go with things that bring us joy and bring us excitement, and then that will bring it to other people. But it's a real choice. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, well, then don't do it. So one of my favorite stories along this line that's really helped me in all my traveling or whatever I do is Beverly Sills was giving a concert in San Francisco one time, and she did it in the afternoon. They had a reception for her, and a reporter from one of the San Francisco papers came up and said, "Miss Sills, I bet you hate the fact you have to give another concert tonight." And she said, "I don't have to give another concert tonight." I said, "What do you mean you don't have to? It's right here in the paper. It's 8 o'clock tonight." Mm-hmm. She said, "I don't have to give another concert. I get to give another concert tonight." She said, "For a long time, I used to be into this I have to, and I felt my energy get drained.
Right.
And one day I realized that thousands of people were going around getting babysitters and getting dressed to come hear me sing, and I get to do this." And I think that enjoyment comes from getting in touch with it. You get to do that. And as I've said before, as a human being, we can make choices. I asked Norman Vincent Peale, why would the Lord give us free will? I mean, a lot of people I know, I wouldn't give them free will. And so he said, the reason the Lord did that is to make you strong. And I said, "What do you mean make you strong?" He said, "Well, it's just like building your muscles. You don't go into the gym and go in and take 1 pound weights and just build your muscles up, or you don't go by taking 400 pounds and trying to lift it." He said, "You grow by resistance." And he said, since we can choose everything and we can make our lives nothing and meaningless, he said, the real growth comes from, and the strength comes from, resisting avenues that will take you off of purpose, will take you into things where you don't have skills or capabilities, and that the choice is powerful, and to recognize you have that, and then when you make that, be with that choice with all the energy and thought you have. And if you can't do that, then hey, you ought to do something else.
Yeah.
And
some people your chances say, on the next spinning planet.
Well, some people say, well, if you have money, you have those opportunities. I want to tell you, everybody has that opportunity, because what's the worst that could happen is that you end up dancing in the street. So I think people in every situation can make choices, and there are people I know with millions and millions and millions of dollars who are really sad human beings who have no sense of purpose, and I've known people who came from poverty, who came with joy and made that. So it's a tremendous choice, and don't sort of say, well, this is that and that caused that and all. Hey, it's a choice, and I think enjoying what you do is a choice.
That's fabulous. So where does the 1 Minute Manager go from here? I mean, you've covered management, weight loss, you've dealt with monkeys. What do the 90s hold for Dr. Ken Blanchard and the 1 Minute Manager?
Well, I'm working on a book now called Funny Business with Mark Goodman and Joel Goodman. They're not related. Mark is a freelance writer in New York I went to school with, and Joel Goodman was a graduate student of mine and is one of the top people in the country on humor. And we're writing a book called Funny Business, taking yourself lightly and your job seriously, and because I think we need more humor.
Yeah.
And I'm also working on a book called The 1 Minute Manager Makes Money, because I think a lot of people
Well, that's pretty clear by now.
a lot of people get hung up on what it takes to make money, and a wonderful entrepreneur friend of mine, Sheldon Bowles, who had all kinds of businesses in Canada, really got me on this and has got all excited. And there's only 3 secrets to making money. The first one is you got to have fun to make money, and that gets that choice. And second secret is that sometime making money has to be more important than having fun, because you can have fun making one painting, but at some point you have to figure a way that maybe somebody might want to buy those, so that you can. And then the third secret is that profit is a result of sales minus expenses. A lot of people, they think they should increase profits by putting all their energy on cutting expenses. And while that's necessary to stay in business, it's a demotivating. And what people need to do is find out how to use energy to increase sales, to create interest in what you're doing.
That's neat. Where will you be in the year 2000? Who will you have become?
I hope I'm one fabulous senior golfer.
That's great.
And I hope I will have become a grandfather, and I could enjoy the kids' kids, and I hope I will have become somebody who can be even more helpful to other people. I hope that we'll get opportunities in a decade to influence the major leaders of the world, because I think if we could get the leaders of the world to understand some of the things that you and I are teaching, that it could make their lives and all. Because one of the other things I got in our 18-country tour was that there are fabulous human beings in the world, and it's only the lack of self-esteem and the egos of leaders that get into getting that energy going in the wrong direction. And how can we help people who have the potential to influence and lead feel good enough about themselves that their leadership is empowerment rather than control?
That's fabulous. Well, Ken, I appreciate you taking the time to share with us all the things that you've shared again. I appreciate your friendship most of all. Over the last 5 years of knowing you, I selected you to be the first person for this program, which I'm very excited about. I'm excited about us sharing the kinds of gems that you've packed into this session so that people have something they can count on every month as just another trigger, something that they can think about that maybe they could apply immediately, increase the quality of their life. And you've gone well beyond what anybody would imagine. But I'd say the thing that I respect about you most is that you walk your talk. That of all the people that I know, and I have the good fortune of knowing some pretty incredible people like you, there aren't any like you. They broke the mold with you, Ken. And your true caring, everything you've talked about here, I want people to know you live it. And sometimes when you read a book, you wonder whether the author lives it, but you live it so far beyond anybody I know. It's incredible. So it's my privilege to have you as a friend and be able to have the relationship we do, and I'm glad that people here will get a chance to hear a little of the inside of what really makes you who you are, and that is the giver. And it was once said that your work is love made visible, and I think the person saying it must have been talking about you. Thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's just always a joy to be with you.
Thanks.
This program is continued on the next cassette.